Hi, I'm Dr. Christian Conti, and parenting, it can be really hard, especially when your children aren't listening. That's why in this video, I'm going to give you the 10 steps that you can take to learn how to discipline your children in the most effective way possible. So stay tuned. Step number 1, remember that your primary goal is to teach your children. Now look, you can go the lazy route and yell and scream and make all kind of fuss at your children when you're trying to teach, but is that really the optimal way that children learn? Is that the best way that you learn? Would you like to be yelled at and screamed at and hit for not knowing something? Think about it. If your primary goal is to teach your children, then think about the best possible way that you can teach them. Step number 2, align your expectations with reality. Your children are young, they're supposed to make mistakes. The reality is they're going to mess up. You and I, we've been around on this earth much longer than our children, and we still make mistakes. And think about it, would you really like it if someone yelled, screamed, demeaned, or hit you just because you made a mistake? Align your expectations with reality. Your children are supposed to make mistakes. They're not born knowing everything. Remember, it's our job to do step 1, which is teach our children. And in order to do that effectively, we move to step 2, which is align our expectations with the reality that our children are going to make mistakes. Step number 3, understand your child's learning style. Look, what works for you won't necessarily work for your children. Think about it. If your children aren't seeing well, are you just going to take off your glasses and say, hey, just put these on? They work for me. I'm sure they'll work for you. It's not going to happen. There are different learning styles. Some children like to learn by visualizing. Other children learn better by listening. Still others learn better by touching things and being hands-on with the experience of it. The fact is that if you want your children to learn, you have to figure out what their learning style is. So figure out your children's learning styles. Step number 4, take the time to meet your children where they are. Look, if you had a friend who was stuck in another state and he called you up and said, I'm stuck in another state, and you said, well, you shouldn't be there. That's not going to do anything. That's kind of a waste of time. If you really want to help your friend, you got to hang up the phone and actually go meet him where he is. And the same is true with our children. If they have been told something time and again and they're not getting it, then the reality is they're not getting it. And so it's your job as a parent to go meet them where they are. You might think, well, I shouldn't have to keep explaining this, or I shouldn't have to say this over and over. But if your children aren't getting it, they're not getting it. That means take the time to go meet them where they are. And when you do that, you'll have done step 4. Step number 5. Talk to the part of your child's brain that you actually want to listen. Look, here's how it is, really simply. Children think higher level thinking happens in the front of your brain. But the part of your brain that's really based on fear or fight or flight is in the middle of your brain. So when we're screaming at our children, the middle part of their brain's activated, but we want the front part to be activated. So if we really want to teach, we've got to step back and just talk. And when we do that, the front part of the brain's activated. Step number 6, give your children choices. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, your children have a choice in every situation. And that means they even have a choice to not listen to you. We might not be able to choose in life all the things that happen to us, but we always have a choice with what we do with what happens to us. In life, your children have a choice whether or not they listen to you. Now, here's what's really important. If they choose not to listen, well, that's why there's a next step. Step number 7, provide consequences. Although it's awesome to validate and acknowledge that your children have a choice, it's really important to not enable your children to keep doing ineffective behaviors. And so, to stop enabling them, you want to provide a consequence that will help them learn the lesson. Because you remember, your goal is to teach your children. Listen to this. Children who have the lowest self-esteem have no rules and no consequences. Children with a little bit higher self-esteem have rules and consequences. But the children with the highest self-esteem have rules, consequences, and explanations. In other words, they understand why their choice led to a specific consequence. Because remember, your ultimate goal is to teach. And when you do that, you need to give them the reality that life has choices and consequences. Step number 8, be consistent. In other words, follow through with whatever you say. That way your children know that you mean what you say. Look, we all start out with a whole lot of credibility with our children, but every time we tell them we're going to do something and we don't, our credibility drops. And it drops and it drops. And that's the bad news, but the good news is this. The more we can be consistent and follow through with what we're going to say, the more our credibility builds back up with our children. I'm not asking you to be perfect in regard to consistency, because any parent out there knows that's pretty much nearly impossible. But what I am asking you to do is to be mindful of being more consistent. The more consistent you are, the more credibility you'll have. Step number 9, use compassion. Remember that there is a big difference between discipline and violence and aggression, and there's no real reason that discipline ever needed to get all entangled with violence and aggression. Children need discipline. They do not need violence or aggression. Compassion. That's what's most important. Step number 10, role model the type of self-discipline that you want your children to have. Look, we all know that children learn much more by watching than by listening to what we're saying. So if we want our children to be self-disciplined and in control of their lives, then we need to be self-disciplined and in control of our lives. In fact, it's the reason why I titled my last book, Zen Parent, Zen Child. If I want my child to be Zen, I've got to become Zen myself. Remember, you are your child's role model, and they're always watching you. So you don't get to take a time out from your character. You've got to be on, because you've got a role model. Because your primary goal in all of this is to teach your children. If this video was helpful for you, one of the best ways to say thank you is by hitting the like button down there, or by subscribing to the channel. Each week, we'll be answering more and more of your questions, so any questions that you have, leave them in the comment section below. And be sure to visit drchristianconti.com. We wish you much peace. We wish you much